How does a 20-ton stealth fighter just vanish into the desert? This is one of the most classified aircraft ever built, an F-117 Nighthawk, and one of them wasn't retired. It was buried alive inside a collapsed bunker, its tail number welded shut. The crew that dug it out thought they'd salvaged a relic. They were wrong. That airframe was still listening. Michael is a salvage operator who buys forgotten military coordinates for a living. A retiring range worker sold him a tip, a collapsed bunker out in the desert. What he found inside wasn't scrap metal. It was a fully intact F-117 Nighthawk, its tail number welded shut, its logbook redacted, hidden like a guilty secret. This wasn't a retirement graveyard. This was a burial. And the moment they pulled it into the light, the jet started talking. The story actually starts 6 months earlier with a phone call from a man named David. David had spent 40 years maintaining bombing ranges in the Nevada desert, and he was 2 weeks from retirement. He told Michael he had a set of coordinates he'd been sitting on since 1991, a collapsed bunker out past Groom Lake, Cold War era, off every map. He said he'd never been inside because the entrance was buried under 12 feet of caliche and rock. But the ground-penetrating scans he'd run in the 90s showed something massive down there, something with the radar signature of a cut diamond. Michael paid him $5,000 for the numbers. 6 weeks later, a flatbed convoy rolled onto federal land with an excavator and a prayer. The bunker was exactly where David said it would be, buried beneath a dry lake bed that hadn't seen rain in 30 years. They dug for 3 days straight, pulling up collapsed concrete slabs and twisted rebar. On the 4th morning, the bucket hit something solid that wasn't rock. A matte black surface, faceted like a gemstone. A shape every aviation nerd knows by heart. The angular arrowhead of an F-117 Nighthawk. It was entombed nose down, its wings folded in by the cave-in, but the airframe was intact. The stealth coating had cracked like dried mud, and the radar-absorbent panels had rotted into a sponge. But this wasn't scrap metal. This was an aircraft that the United States Air Force publicly swore was either in a museum or destroyed. Michael's crew spent 2 more days bracing the tunnel and dragging the wreck into the sun. The moment it cleared the rubble, they noticed something that made no sense. Every F-117 has a tail number stamped on the vertical stabilizers and the fuselage. This one didn't. The area where the numbers should have been had been ground down, welded over, and then painted to match the rest of the airframe. Somebody wanted this jet to have no identity. Then one of the mechanics got the cockpit canopy pried open. Wedged beside the ejection seat, wrapped in oilcloth, was a logbook. Michael flipped it open. The first page had a flight date, January 16, 1991. The pilot's name was blacked out. The mission details were blacked out. Every single page after was solid black. 112 pages of redacted nothing. This wasn't a salvage operation anymore. He had just dug up a buried lie, and the people who put it there might still be watching. The first thing Michael did after reading that logbook was look over his shoulder. Not because he saw anything, but because that's what a man does when he realizes he's standing next to a secret the government tried to bury. He told the crew to put down their phones and cover the jet with a tarp. They loaded the airframe onto a flatbed under moonlight and drove out of the desert without saying a word. 9 hours later, the ghost jet was locked inside Michael's restoration bay, a hangar so far off the grid it didn't have a street address. That was the moment the salvage became a tomb raid, and the tomb wasn't done talking. The first thing they did was X-ray the welded tail number. The ground-down patch was too smooth, too deliberate. Someone had spent hours erasing that identity, but metal has memory. When the X-ray came back, it showed a faint ghost of the original stamping, 83-0812. Michael ran the number through every declassified database he could find. What came back turned his stomach. The Air Force had an 83-0812 in its inventory, an F-117A that was officially listed as destroyed. Shot down over western Iraq on the opening night of Operation Desert Storm, January 16, 1991. Pilot recovered, aircraft declared unrecoverable, wreckage abandoned in enemy territory. That was the official story. The jet sitting in his hangar had no battle damage, no bullet holes, no shrapnel scars. The airframe was pristine under the rot. Somebody faked a shoot-down. Somebody flew this bird home and buried it. The crew stood around the cockpit for 10 minutes in total silence. That logbook wasn't just redacted because of classified mission data. It was hidden because the mission never happened. The jet was never supposed to exist. And now Michael was holding the one piece of physical evidence that could rewrite the history of the stealth program. But the black pages gave him nothing. Every angle, every light source, every digital filter just showed solid toner. They weren't hidden under black ink. They were obliterated. Someone had removed the pages entirely and replaced them with black paper. The only original sheet was the first one with the date, and even that wasn't enough to prove anything beyond a flight to nowhere. Michael knew one hard truth. If he wanted answers, the jet had to fly again. The avionics bay was sealed, the data ports fried from decades of desert corrosion. The only way to power up the onboard computers was to restore the electrical system and the engines. That meant rebuilding the entire airframe. And that's where they hit the wall that almost ended everything. The F-117 is not an aluminum jet. It's a house of cards made from titanium, carbon composite, and a classified radar-absorbent skin that was applied in layers like dragon scales. The panels they pulled off crumbled in their hands. They needed to fabricate new ones. But the stealth coating wasn't just paint. It was a multispectral material laced with iron ball microspheres and ferrite compounds. The formula was locked behind a special access program that hadn't been active in 30 years. Without the right adhesive, the faceted panels would never bond properly. The jet would fall apart on its first taxi, or worse, its radar signature would light up like a Christmas tree. Michael called every aerospace contact he had. Nobody would touch a black project from the 80s. The liability alone was nuclear. He was holding a ghost, and he couldn't find a single person who knew how to stitch it back together. Then, buried in a 40-year-old maintenance manual for a different stealth prototype, he found a footnote. It referenced a panel bonding technique developed by a technician named Sarah Morrow, who had filed an internal patent in 1987 for a conductive adhesive that cured in a vacuum. The manual listed her last known location, a Skunk Works annex in Palmdale. That facility closed in 1993. Michael dug through property records, obituaries, and alumni lists until he found a Sarah Morrow still alive, living in a small house outside Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. 93 years old. He didn't call first. He just drove. When she opened the door, Michael held up a photo of the battered Nighthawk in his hangar and asked one question. "Do you remember the glue that held the ghost together?" She looked at the photo, then at the desert highway behind him and said, "You'd better come inside. They told me they destroyed that bird." They got the formula from Sarah, handwritten on yellow legal paper, ingredient for ingredient. She told them the adhesive had to cure under vacuum, and if they mixed it wrong, the panels would peel off at 300 knots. The crew built a clean room out of plastic sheeting and desperation. It took 4 months to fabricate the new skin, and every time they fired up a test engine, the hangar lights flickered like a warning. But the real warning came the morning they finally ran the avionics self-test. The screen stayed dark for 30 seconds. Then every display lit up amber. A comms channel booted that wasn't supposed to exist. The frequency was locked to a military satellite decommissioned in 1998. But the satellite wasn't dead. Someone had been leasing it. And that someone had just received a handshake from a ghost that was never meant to wake up. The code was encrypted, but the routing header was not. The destination was a relay station in Northern Virginia, a facility that doesn't appear on any public register. Whoever buried this jet in a collapsed bunker had wired it to phone home the moment it came back online. And now, 30 years later, it had. Michael killed the power immediately, but the damage was done. Somewhere a screen had blinked with a tail number that was supposed to be a crater in the Iraqi desert. He had a choice: push the jet back into the dark or finish what he started. He chose the latter. The ghost jet flew 3 months later, its faceted skin painted in the original matte black, its engines whispering across the dry lake bed. On that first pass, the encrypted channel went silent. No response, no intercept. Either they were watching and didn't care, or they never existed at all. Michael never found out, and the crew never asked because some questions have answers you don't want. One final thing. When Sarah died 2 years later, her daughter sent Michael a box of old photographs. In one of them, a young woman in coveralls stands next to a freshly painted F-117, grinning, holding a sign that says, "First flight never happened." On the back was a date, January 16, 1991, the same date in the logbook. Some stories get buried. This one learned how to fly again. The desert doesn't care about your secrets. It takes what you bury and keeps it until someone with a shovel and too much curiosity decides otherwise. The Nighthawk sits in Michael's hangar now, fully restored, fully functional, fully unregistered. It doesn't exist on any civilian database, and the military won't acknowledge it. They never will. Because acknowledging that jet means admitting they faked a shoot-down, scrubbed a tail number, and left a billion-dollar ghost to rot under 12 feet of caliche. What were they hiding? A failed mission, a classified payload, or something that scared them enough to erase it from the record? Sarah took that answer with her, and maybe that's the point. The most dangerous question you can ask isn't what happened here. It's why did someone want this forgotten? That question leads to places no one was meant to tread. Michael tread there anyway. And now, every time he fires up those engines on a quiet morning, the black jet whispers across the desert floor like a secret that refused to die. If this story reminded you that some mysteries are worth digging up, hit subscribe. There are more ghosts out there, and we're not done looking.